Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I am Bearded Dev. Today we're going to be talking about ISNULL, COALESCE and the differences between ISNULL and COALESCE. Let's jump over to SQL Server Management Studio and I'm going to go through some demos. Okay, so we're on SQL. I'm going to open up a new query against my database, the bookshop, and I'm going to write, we're going to return all the columns from our customers table. So let's just execute that query and have a look at our results grid. Here we can see we've got a column middle name, that is a nullable column, and we've also got the second line of the address, which is a nullable column. I'll just open these up in Object Explorer as well. So we'll open up our customers table, we'll open up columns. As we can see on the middle name, we accept nulls, and in the second line of the address we accept nulls as well. We do accept nulls in the other columns, but we haven't got any nulls there at the moment. Remember, null is just a representative of unknown. It doesn't mean necessarily these customers haven't got a middle name or a second line of address. It just means they're not present at the moment. We don't know. They're unknown to us, and null is a placeholder for that. Let's imagine we want to return our data. We want to return our customer middle name, our customer first name. We want to return our customer middle name, and we want to return our customer last name. Let's imagine this data is going through to our system in the bookshop. So we've got a staff member who's searching for customers, runs this query, and they think, well, I've got Michael, Paul and Sandra, and they've all got null as the middle name. That doesn't make any sense. And that's what it is from an end user's perspective. They have no idea what null is. Null is just something we use, as I've mentioned many times now, to represent unknown. We don't really want an end user to see that data. They're not going to know what to do with it. So one option we've got is to use the built-in function ISNULL. And what ISNULL allows us to do is to change any value, not any value, but anywhere we've got null as a placeholder, into a value. So looking at this middle name column, I'm going to put ISNULL middle name. As we can see here, we've opened up our ISNULL function. It's ISNULL open brackets our expression column and the replacement value, and that's going to return any type. So that's how we need to write out the syntax. So our expression is middle name, we're going to put our comma, and our replacement value we're going to write none, just to indicate that they haven't got a middle name. And we're going to alias that column. Because we have manipulated it, we need to give that column a name. And if I execute that query now, all the nulls have been replaced with the word none. I don't necessarily have to put something in there. I could just put a blank space, and if I run that query it would be exactly the same. If I wanted to, not really relevant for the data I'm working with, I could put a number in there and I could run that and it would return 1, 2, 3 as the middle name. Something to bear in mind though with ISNULL. Let's look at the column type we're looking at. So the data type is a varchar 50, but we've entered 1, 2, 3. Now, is that going to be returned as an integer or a varchar? It's going to be returned as a varchar. It's going to be returned as the expression column data type. So although it looks to be an integer column, it is actually a varchar, and that's something quite important to bear in mind when working with ISNULL. Let's just go through another example. We're going to look at the same table, but we want to return the address details for our customers. So we have first line, second line, city and postcode. So we're going to return that those columns from our customers table. And if we execute that query, we can see in the second line of address we've got some null placeholders there. And we want to replace those. We don't want those returned. Let's write our function is null, open brackets, we've already got C second line in there, comma, what do we want to replace this with? We'll just replace this with blank. And we'll give that an alias because we have manipulated the column, and we'll just call it the original column name. And if we run that query, our nulls have now changed to blank data. That's the purpose of ISNULL, and we're going to move on to COALESCE now, and we're going to work on exactly the same examples. So COALESCE is very similar to ISNULL in that we use it to change any null placeholder into a value that we would like to return. So I'll write the top query based on the names exactly as we have done above, and instead of using ISNULL, I'm going to use COALESCE middle name. We'll replace it with 1, 2, 3. What the hell? It's just an example. We're not actually going to be returning 1, 2, 3 to our front end system. So if I now run that query, we can see we've got an error. Why have we got an error? Because unlike ISNULL, COALESCE actually chooses the data type of the replacement value. So in this scenario, it recognises that 1, 2, 3 is an integer, so thinks it needs to return this column as an integer. But we have got middle name people who have actually got middle names. As we can see in the error, we couldn't convert the varchar value Sharon to a data type int. We can't change that to an integer. It's not going to work. An option we could cast the 1, 2, 3 as a varchar. We could convert it to a varchar. We're not going to do that. We're going to put in something more relevant to us. So if they haven't got a middle name, let's just return blank. Let's run that query. It works. We've got the middle name column now as blank. We could change that to, as we originally did, none, and run that query, and we've got the word none there. None is fine because it's an integer, because it's a varchar. It's definitely not an integer. Let's try a decimal. So if the middle name column is null, return the decimal 12.00. And again, we've got the error. We couldn't convert the text to a numeric data type. So that's one difference to bear in mind between ISNULL and COALESCE, and we're going to move on to other differences shortly. Let's write out our second example that's based on our addresses. So we're going to change ISNULL for COALESCE. Second line, we know there's nulls in that column. I am also aware, guys, that these other columns do accept nulls, so we could have null values in the other columns. We don't at the moment, and this is just an example we're working with. If this was a production environment, every single column that is nullable we'd be using COALESCE or ISNULL with. So if I execute this query now, we're saying COALESCE, the second line is the expression, and we want to replace that with blank. And as we can see, that's worked correctly. So I like to think I'm pretty good at reading minds, and I bet you guys are thinking, well, ISNULL and COALESCE, why do we want two things that do exactly the same thing? And we're going to go through now the differences between the two. ISNULL is specific to Microsoft. Microsoft's version of SQL is T-SQL for short, or Transact SQL. That's the flavour of SQL that we use in Microsoft database management software. But COALESCE is ANSI standard. That means it will work across all database management systems. So if we was to switch over to an Oracle database and use ISNULL, I believe that would fail because that's not a built-in function for Oracle unless they've introduced it recently. But COALESCE would work because that's ANSI standard. That can be used across any platform. And it's worth bearing in mind, guys, that when you have something that's specific to the version of SQL that you're working with, or something that's the ANSI standard, it's always best to go with the ANSI standard. Why? Imagine you was to move on to working with Oracle databases. You might work with both SQL and Oracle databases. Obviously there are other database systems available, but for your own knowledge is then more portable, so you can move from one to the other. The only thing I would mention, unless it's absolutely essential for you to use that specific function that is specific to the version of SQL you're using, there are scenarios where you need to do that. So that is the only scenario that I could think of where you would have to use that specific function that's specific to that particular flavour of SQL. The Oracle language, by the way, is called PL SQL. So that's one of the differences, and we saw another difference earlier with the data types as well. So ISNULL will always use the expressions data type, and COALESCE will always use the non-nullable values data type. And we're just going to demonstrate that again. So I'm just going to write out a couple of variables here. So we're going to have A, that's just going to be a char, we're going to say that's null, and then we're going to have B, which is going to be a character string of 10 characters, and we're going to write in here, how many letters is this? Querying. So it's not quite 10 characters, but that isn't really relevant. So we're going to write select is null. We're not going to look at a table here, we're just going to be looking at the variables we're using. We're going to use A, which we know is null, and then we're going to return B, which we know isn't null, and we'll return that as A, and then we'll do a coalesce exactly the same, and we'll return that as B. Now we're going to run these two queries. Now what we've learnt earlier with the data types, are we going to be expecting the same results to be returned in table A and table B? Let's run the query, let's highlight all of that, click on execute, and find out what our results are going to be. Now as we can see, the ISNULL has only returned QUE, where B, our coalesce statement, has returned querying, which we was expecting ISNULL to return. And the reason is because A is the first input, which is a 3-character string, into our ISNULL statement, it will then change B into a 3-character string. No matter how many characters it's got within there, that's what it will change it to. It will choose the data type of the expression input, the first input into the ISNULL function, whereas coalesce will choose the non-nullable columns data type, or in this case, non-nullable variable data type. That's something to always bear in mind. We're going to discuss another difference between the two functions now, and again we're not going to look at a table, but we're going to just look at ISNULL, and we're going to write null, 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 and then the value 1. And then we're going to do the same with coalesce. We're going to write out 4 nulls and a 5th value of 1 in our list, and we're going to execute these queries. What do you think is going to happen to our results? We're going to highlight them both at the same time, click on F5, and we've got an error. The error is the ISNULL function requires 2 arguments, and it only accepts 2 arguments. So we're going to have to remove these further arguments we've got in here. So now our squiggly line has gone underneath to indicate that our syntax is now correct, and we can execute these 2 queries, and they've both returned the same result. But as we can see here, we've got an advantage with coalesce in the fact that that accepts a list of values and an unlimited list of values, so that we may be searching for the first non-null value in a list. And that's where coalesce can be beneficial. We couldn't use that with ISNULL. We could probably use multiple nested ISNULLs, which would get very complex and look very horrible on screen. We don't want to do that. We've got the function there, coalesce, that can accept many inputs and will output the first non-null value. I'm just going to highlight a little danger with ISNULL as well. So if we looking at the sort of data types and how it cuts that down. So if we had a column, we've got our first name here in our customers table, which is a varchar 50. So we'll input that. And this is just an example. So if that's null, we're going to replace that with, and I'm just going to type out loads of text here. So almost a whole line across the screen of text. We need our from DBO customers. So if we run this, we know from our example earlier, we're not expecting that many characters to be returned. We can see in Object Explorer, our column C first name is a varchar 50, so can hold up to 50 characters. Let's execute that. Obviously we haven't got any nulls in that column, so that's why we didn't return any results. Silly me there. So we'll run it against middle name. We know we've got nulls in that column. Let's execute that query. And as we can see, they've all been cut down where the nulls were to, I'm not going to count them, but I'm 99.9% sure there are 50 characters returned in our column there. So that's something to bear in mind if you're working with a column that's maybe only 10 characters, and if it's null, you want to return 20 characters, and you get half the text that you were expecting. That is why. That is the cause behind it, because it will choose the data type of the expression. I'm just going to open up a store procedure that I threw together earlier called customer search. And this is quite common that we have, quite a common store procedure we come across. So imagine a front-end system, particularly imagine somebody working in the bookshop and they want to search for customers. They may want to search by customer ID, they may want to search by their first names, they may want to search by cities, they may want to search by last names. A customer comes up to them and says, and wants to buy a book, and they want to record that against the customer details. They could ask for various bits of information, input that into the system, and then return that customer. They may want to enter combinations, so they may want to enter a customer ID and a customer first name and a middle name. We don't know, and that's very difficult. That's difficult for us to handle in SQL. We don't know what that input is going to be. So as you can see here with my store procedure customer search, we've got all the columns declared as parameters for this store procedure, and then we select from the customer table based on that information. So we're going to give executing this store procedure a go. So I'm just going to open up a new query window to execute this, and I'm going to write exec, our store procedure name, and let's say we've only got the customer ID of 1. Now, as we can see in our parameters, we've entered default values, so if nothing's entered for first name, middle name, last name and so on, null will be passed into the store procedure and executed. So I'm just going to execute this statement now and see what happens. We've got no results returned. But if I look in this customers table, where CID equals 1, we've got a customer with ID 1. And that's because within this store procedure we've only passed the customer ID of 1 and the rest of the values are null. So when we're using this where clause down here, there is no customer that matches that. Now, an option for this is to use dynamic SQL and we could build the query within SQL itself. So we could break it down into if statements and say if the customer ID is not null, so it's been passed in, then we build our query with that and the various other parameters that may or may not be entered, and then execute that query. But another option is to use COALESCE. And in another video I'm going to be looking at the performance, because a lot of people do write off dynamic SQL. And yes, there are certain scenarios where it's great and certain scenarios where it's terrible. People starting with SQL find it hard to read, but it can be extremely beneficial in certain situations. So I'm going to do another video on that, just comparing the performance of the two. But this video we're looking at COALESCE. So how can we handle this query with COALESCE? Well, what we're going to do within our where clause, we don't know that when we execute this query, or when on the front end our staff member who's searching for the customer, we don't know what they're going to do, what they're going to pass in. There are many combinations that they could pass in. We haven't got a clue. So let's change this to a COALESCE, our parameter customer ID, and if that's null, what should we use? Our customer ID. So what's this going to say? Let's just space out a few lines and just focus on this particular area at the moment. So we're saying we want to select all the columns from the customers where the customer ID is the parameter customer ID, but if that's null, if that hasn't been passed in, then where the customer ID equals the customer ID. So that's going to match. So if we haven't passed the customer ID in as our parameter, we know that's going to match. Now I'm just going to add the rest of those in. Just bear with me and I'll be back with you shortly. Okay guys, I've added all those COALESCE statements in now, and I know some of you will be screaming at the screen saying the rest of the columns can have null inputs as well, you need to handle those. This is just an example. In a production environment I would have done that. In hindsight, the columns should be not null, and I will be altering them after this video. Let's click on execute to update our stored procedure. We've got a message to say it's updated successfully. Let's go back and try executing that stored procedure again with customer ID 1. We've still got no results. If we run the select from the customers, we know we've got a customer ID with 1. Let's go back to our stored procedure. You can press Ctrl R on the screen, which will remove the results grid. Now, can anyone see or understand why this query is failing? And I'll give you a clue. It's to do with some columns that we have got nulls in. So, and we know what they are. They are middle name and they are second line of address. Let's just jump back to this query window. We'll get rid of our where clause and we'll just run a select all from customers. So we've got 3 customers and we don't know their middle name. We've got nulls in there. So let's run a query to say where middle name equals middle name. And that's got to be right, hasn't it? Even if there are nulls in there, they still match. Well, let's run it and find out. So we've only got 2 results, and the results that weren't returned were the customers with null in the middle name. And that's because it's important to understand that when looking for where null equals null, that is unknown. Null is not the word null, it represents unknown. So that would not be returned. If we was to drop a COALESCE on both of these column names in our query, then they would be returned. So we could write COALESCE middle name 1. So if it is null, just replace it with a number 1. Again, that number 1 will be returned as our data type varchar, because that's what our first input is. So if I was to run this, we'll get an error. So we're going to just replace it with blank. And there we go, we've got all our results returned. So what do we need to do to our store procedure to fix this? Is handle the nulls on middle name and second line. So let's just drop those in, and we'll change coalesce to be blank, and we'll do that over here as well, because we want to match. So we want to say blank equals blank, return the results. Just add that query into both. I'll update this. And also, we've got our select statement here, where we also want to handle those. So, bearing in mind, those are the columns we're returning. So we need to present that, and we also need to give that an alias, because we've manipulated that column. So we're going to give it its original name, and we'll also handle second line as well. So the statement is coalesce, open brackets, inputs, and in the last area we're going to enter blank, which is what we want to be returned. I say that, but remember, we can have multiple expressions and it will return the first non-nullable value. We're going to give this an alias of the original column name as second line. Make sure we add a comma there, or our results won't return as expected. Let's execute that to update our store procedure. Let's execute our store procedure now. Customer search, we're looking for customer ID 1. Finally, we have got some results. Now let's get rid of this. Let's just run everything in our customers table. And let's search for a customer. We have a search for a customer where his middle name is null and the second line of his address is null. Let's try customer ID 2. Let's execute that, and we get the details for Paul. Let's just do a further test and enter more parameters. So let's pass in his first name. We want that to equal Paul. City, we want that to equal Birmingham. Pretty famous for the bull ring, and they've just had a massive redevelopment of their train station called Grand Central. And we'll enter his date of birth as well. See, it's not just about SQL, guys, you do get some amazing facts as well. So 1965, April 1st, born on April Fool's Day. Let's run this query now, and we'd expect the result to be the same. Brilliant. So we've tested our store procedure there, and we can see the results being returned are correct. Like I say, in another video I'm going to look at this coalesce versus dynamic SQL. That's some testing I've been wanting to do myself for a while, just to find out what the performance is like. You will come across in the systems where you've got search pages that are generally could be free text, and they've got the option to enter a few fields or just one field, but you don't know what's going to be entered, and you need to handle that. Really hope you've enjoyed the video there, guys. We've picked up on ISNULL, we've picked up on coalesce, we've gone through the differences, and we've done a bit on store procedures, but most importantly we've learned how to handle nulls in the database, and how not to pass that data, well, how not to return that data, how we can change that data from null into the whatever we want to receive. If you have enjoyed the video, guys, please do hit the thumbs up button. Place any comments you'd like to below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I am uploading videos regularly on all areas of SQL. We're going to be moving into some Excel stuff as well, and some other areas like reporting products as well. If you've got anything you'd like to email me, my email address is askbeardeddev@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.